So I think now we want to get into the meat of the episode, and we sort of talked about some of the scaffolding around it. Your approach to some of the forecasting that you've done in the past. But can you speak a bit about how you approach this question of the Ever Given ship and the Suez Canal? Did you use an outside view perspective or a base rate for this? Sort of a black swan event, so it might have been hard to do that. Just what were some of the biggest factors that you were thinking about?
Yeah, so it was I think this question is definitely not a good question to use outside view on. I definitely tried to Google like other ships that got like, have any gotten stuck? How long did they take to get out? But I didn't really find any good examples, and it looked to be incredibly case by case. And the last time there was a Suez crisis, it was during a huge war between Egypt and Israel. So I don't think that really was a good base rate. Obviously, I don't think we've ever had a ship just blocking the canal during peacetime before. So yeah, I kind of basically ignored all outside views and just kind of really tried to focus a lot just on the individual facts of the case. And I didn't really make a good forecast until after like I had observed a good amount of their attempt to extract the ship. Like I think I made my forecast like on like I think the second, well into like the third day of the rescue attempt.
And so, like, what were those primary factors that you considered while, determining that inside view? You said you were watching sort of the process of digging it out. Was it how much sand they were removing each day? Like, what? So, yeah, what were the factors that went into your forecast?
Yeah. So I think the main thing I did, like when I first saw the market on Polymarket, I saw it on Polymarket first, and then I saw it on Metaculus, and then I tried to compare the two, and like that was kind of interesting. I think Metaculus started out being a little bit more a little bit more optimistic than Polymarket. So that's good for Metaculus. But like I saw the price fluctuating a lot, and I like tried to just read a lot of different news articles. I think I may have read like 24 different articles where they had these like experts like speculating about how the ship got stuck and like how they're going to get it out and like what they need to do. And like one of the main things I saw was it seemed like no one really knew anything. Like some people thought it would be out in only a couple of days. They ended up being right. Some people thought it would take weeks, and like they kind of just discussed the factors. And the main thing it seemed like was that I was either going to get dug out pretty quick, or they're going to need to unload all the cargo and it would take weeks. And I thought it was kind of like 50-50 because it didn't really seem like anyone had any good idea about how hard it is to dig out the ship or not. And so then when I saw the market was kind of confident in one direction, it seemed kind of like it could make sense to sort of take a stake in the opposite direction. But I didn't really make a firm forecast until they were well into the digging process. I think the main thing for me was two things. One, that the tides were going to get better every day. They were hoping to use the tides to float out the ship. There's obviously high tide and low tide every day, but there's a lunar tide cycle as well, and it was approaching a full moon. So they were going to have like the highest possible tide. It ended up being the day after they floated the ship was the peak tide. So they got it out even faster than peak tide. And then the second thing was digging. It seemed like a lot of people were getting like thinking that the digging wasn't going to work because they hadn't made a ton of progress yet. But when I was like reading about the digging, it just seemed like they weren't even finished. Like there was a lot more digging to be done that hadn't been done yet. And like they had published information on like the rate of the digging and the amount of sand left to dig. And like that kind of led me to believe that the digging attempts haven't even really had a chance to succeed yet. So like all the people that thought digging was done and we just had to unload the ship, like it didn't seem like that was actually borne out by the evidence. And I think the key thing for me was eventually they had dug enough of the ship that they were able to start rotating the ship. And when they rotated the ship, I think they announced they had rotated it 30 degrees in both directions. And that seemed to me like an incredibly positive sign. And they haven't even finished digging yet. And that's exactly when I launched my optimistic forecast, was hearing about them rotating 30 degrees. Like I'm not an expert on ships or how to dig out ships, but that seemed like a really strong signal that they were going to be able to release the ship. And then like one of the Egyptian ministers like announced that he thought they would get the ship out in 2 days or so. And he seemed like a moderately trustworthy source, though of course there were other sources disputing his claims. And yes, that's kind of was the main thing for me. There definitely was a lot of noise. Like other things I was trying to pay attention to were like how many ships they were rerouting, because it seemed like if you reroute a ship, you kind of think that the canal is not going to get cleared anytime soon. But it seemed like every company had their own decisions about like how much costly a reroute would be versus how costly staying in the canal would be. And it was like hard to extract information from that. I think another big sign was that like I was looking at oil prices and they didn't seem to be panicking all that much, which might suggest that people in the market kind of expected a tidy resolution. And so like that was also potentially a positive sign as well. But it was really like the ship rotation and the fact that they still were making digging process that made me make my optimistic forecast the way it did. And then that proved out to be correct because they released the ship even faster than I expected. I guess I was waiting for the peak tide, but they got it out even faster than peak tide.
It's really interesting that you mentioned shipping companies rerouting their ships. That's another group where this sort of accurate forecast would have been very valuable for them to have. I imagine if most of the shipping companies would have been able to forecast it, it would have been cleared by the end of March. A far fewer number would have rerouted their ships. What I sort of want to follow up on is you sort of made your public optimistic forecast on Twitter around noon or so Eastern on Sunday, and the major news that the ship was likely going to be cleared out within the next day came late that night. And I was wondering how your internal forecast, if it at all changed between when you posted that forecast and when the news broke.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't change too much because I don't think there really was like minute by minute news updates available as far as I could tell. Obviously, when the news broke that the ship like had been floated, like obviously I became very confident they would get it out. I think there was a moment in the poly market though where they like spiked to like incredibly confident, and I ended up taking a no position that the ship would not get floated out, just because it seemed like, you know, there's always things that could go wrong and that there's like always tail risks. And then I ended up being able to sell that no position for a good sized profit as well once they did encounter a setback. And then I flipped back to a yes position. So I actually won the market 3 times. So that definitely added up to my profits.
So can you speak a bit more about sort of your approach to this play on poly market, especially sort of in comparison to how you might have approached it on other platforms like
And
Metaculus?
could you also just give a quick explanation of what poly market is and how it works?
Yeah. So Polymarket is a betting website. You need cryptocurrency, but not like Bitcoin or Ethereum. You actually use what's called USD coin, which is just pegged 1-to-1 with US dollars. So you're not like risking anything on crypto fluctuations. It's all like tied to American dollars. And it like works on the blockchain. I don't really know what the blockchain is. You can Google it. And you then can just buy these contracts. They're binary options. What that means is that they are tied to a particular event, like whether the ship will be rescued by March 30th. If the event happens as planned, all the yes options turn into $1 and all the no options turn into $0. And if it does not happen, all the no options turn into $1 and all the yes options turn into 0. And so then these options are sold at a market price that fluctuates, and it would fluctuate based on people's confidence in the event happening. So like if it's worth like 60 cents, that means people think it has like a 60% chance of happening, and you can like either go long or short by buying or yes or buying no respectively. And then you can sell at any time as well for the new market price. So it could end up being profitable to take positions you think are not going to happen if your like likelihood is higher than the market, or even if you think the market might just misprice them even more in the future or something. This kind of gets into some of the market psychology stuff I was talking about earlier. I think the way I went into it initially was thinking it would be 50-50. So I bought Yes because Yes was underpriced. Then when it did hit 50-50, I sold because I didn't have any idea anymore. And then once the ship got rotated 30 degrees each way, I bought Yes again. And then I think it went down to 27 cents, like you said. So I bought a lot of Yes. And then it went up to 95 cents and I sold all my Yes. And I bought No because I thought they were overconfident in the ship being floated. And then No went back up to 20 cents and Yes went down to 80 cents because it always has to add up to 1. So that was like a 4x return on that. And then I flipped back into Yes and then bought Yes until the ship was floated and then finished floating and moving, and then I sold it. I know that's kind of complicated. Hopefully that sort of makes sense. But
so you definitely you both were you had your forecast, but you were doing more than just betting the forecast. You were playing the market with the knowledge you had from your forecast. I'm curious,
yeah, exactly.
Did you sort of calculate a total return that you were able to make on this forecast?
I think it looks like I made about $812 in net profit, and that was, I think, off of like spending $650 wagered. So like, I guess that's like a little over doubling. I tend not to bet that big. I know other people were taking like 4 or 5 figure bets on this market, but I'm kind of keeping things small. But I do think that was definitely some really good returns, especially compared to the size of my portfolio.